Diaries, The Rosset in India, Second Nature Saving Tiger Landscapes in the 21st Century in English, and Shalege Banda Chirte ಮತ್ತು ಇತರ ಕಥೆಗಳು, ವನ್ಯಜೀವಿಗಳ ರಮ್ಯಲೋಕ in Kannada, and a bilingual book, Land of the Honey Badger. Dr. Gubbi is the recipient of the Whitley Award. He encourages and cultivates young conservation enthusiasts and researchers to ensure their work's broader and long-term sustenance. Mewa Singh is a primatologist, ethologist, and conservation biologist. He is a professor of ecology and animal behavior at the University of Mysuru. He has published more than 200 research papers in life sciences in prestigious journals in India and outside. He edited a book titled Macaw Societies, a model for the study of social organization, and published by Cambridge University, England. He's an elected fellow of the Indian Academy of Sciences, Bangalore, and Indian National Science Academy, New Delhi. In his honor for research in biological sciences, some biologists have named a recently discovered new species of frog from the Western Ghats, Mewa Singh's night frog. Pamela Malhotra. Rooted in the spiritual culture of her Native American heritage, her love affair with nature coincided with her lifelong journey with her beloved husband Anil. The respect for the sanctity of creation resulted in creating their first wildlife sanctuary on the big island of Hawaii. Eventually shifting to India, they established a model private wildlife sanctuary in Kodagu with hundreds of acres of reclaimed and preserved forests under their protection. They also founded the non-profitable charitable trust SAI, Save Animals Initiative, Sanctuary Trust. Over the years, Pamela's environmental work and her efforts for women's empowerment have been recognized globally, receiving several awards like India's Nari Shakti Puraskar, Karnataka State Environment and Conservation Award, and many others. Over to you, sir.
Allawurge namaskara.
Namaskara.
Good afternoon to all of you. See, I am a moderator, so I'll take most of the time, I'll take a back seat. These two are the main speakers. But I'll have a couple of questions to them, and then I'll also ask public to ask questions, because this morning you heard Mr. Shrikant. He said something very interesting, and that is, you have to have a passion in life to do something. And this is a topic like this. You know, talking about wildlife or conserving wildlife, and I'm sure everybody understands that unless you have passion for wildlife, you can't do wildlife. You know, wildlife is such an important issue. I mean, on one hand, people go to Nagarhole or Bandipur and such places for recreation, for enjoyment. But at the same time, for people like, you know, you would hear a lot from Pamela. She is a naturalist. She has done so much work for, you know, I don't want to preempt when she would tell all those things. And Sanjay and me, we are both hardcore scientists. Most of our papers are published, which probably nobody here would read them because of a lot of mathematical modeling and statistics and, you know, a lot of ecology stuff. But see, since wildlife is threatened, you see, India is one of the countries which is known as, some parts of India which are known as hotspots of biodiversity in the world. Just some 4-5% of the land of the world, 15% of biodiversity of the world lies in India, especially Western Ghats and Eastern Himalayas and even the Western Himalayas. But most of our species are now actually threatened. They need some kind of a protection. They need some kind of conservation efforts, which we would come more and more. But one thing which we have realized after a long, you know, term research in the field, that there is need of people's involvement. Unless you involve people, you can't talk of wildlife or wildlife conservation. And one of the ways to involve people is to present our science to people, to write books. And that's what this discussion is about. I have also written a book which is published by Cambridge University in England. Sanjay writes books, but the only difference is that his book would be read by thousands of people, even in India, and mine would be read probably by 300 to 400 hardcore scientists. But so So this is the beauty, and these are the two books which we would be focusing on because the camera is there, and because see, this is the one book is by Pamela. This is from the heart of nature. You would hear a lot about this book. This is one of the most fascinating books I've ever read, and we'll talk more about this book later. And this is Sanjay's second book. I mean, his other book is about the tiger landscapes, and this is Leopard Diaries. And we would know much and more about Sanjay's work on leopards, which is classic work as far as science is concerned and as far as conservation is concerned. So now we would talk about wildlife, but what I have planned here is we have discussed that we would keep coming back to the books. The books will remain the focus because wildlife is some such subject. If Sanjay and me start talking about the next 2 days, we would be only talking about wildlife science or something, but we would maintain the focus on these two books. So to begin with, I would ask both of you, say in about 2 to 3 minutes each, something about wildlife. In my case, it did not happen, but in case of most of the people, something happens in their childhood. They develop some kind of a passion for wildlife. I am a Punjabi Sardar, a Jat, farmer. In our 25-hectare farm, we had 7 trees. This is my exposure to forestry from my childhood onwards. And whole of Punjab, sometimes in our village, one monkey came, the whole village was there. Hanuman ji aage. There was no monkey. There is the whole Punjab, the flat land, and I started doing research in Himalayas in 1973, way back for my PhD, and that was my first exposure to forest and wildlife. But but these people have had some kind of a background, so I would ask you people to talk briefly about your childhood, how you developed passion for wildlife, and then also developing a perspective for writing books and making it popularizing it and making it available to general public. So Pamela.
Can you hear me without this? No. Okay. I have a loud voice, but I'll make it louder. Just an aside, my passion for Punjabi started in 1973 when I met my husband, who was a Punjabi through and through, a Malhotra. So I was very fortunate. I know I don't look it, but I'm part Native American Indian on my mother's side. And so my passion for wildlife and forests has its root in my mother, who absolutely loved animals and Mother Nature. So I was very fortunate. I was brought up with that kind of an influence. In addition, where we lived, we bordered the wooded estate of a very wealthy man, and he loved children. So he let us play in the woods all the time. So that is where, from an early age, I got the opportunity to go into the woods and observe wildlife and love birds. We had a menagerie at our house all the time. And so that is the earliest memories I have, is thanks to my mother, supported by my father. And so that's where it came from. And then it grew from there, especially in college, when I went to college in Colorado with the beautiful Rocky Mountains and all the wildlife that is there. And then it was my dream early on to have a private wildlife sanctuary. It was such a vivid dream that I even drew a picture of what I would like. But it was my beloved husband that had the task of turning that dream into a reality. So he was the one that had the hard time and the hard trouble and work in turning that dream into a reality, both in Hawaii, but especially here in India. First in the Himalayas, which had problems as far as land sealing acts, and then finally down here in the Kodagu district, where we were taking over abandoned plantation lands. So I have to give my husband all the credit, because without his perseverance, his expertise in legal and financial affairs, and his determination, our sanctuary would not exist. It would not exist. So that gives you a brief about me. So I'm turning it over to Sanjay.
ಥ್ಯಾಂಕ್ ಯು ಪಮೇಲಾ. ನಮಸ್ಕಾರ ಎಲ್ಲರಿಗೂ. ಗುಡ್ ಆಫ್ಟರ್ನೂನ್. ನನ್ನ ಹೆಸರು ಡಾಕ್ಟರ್ ಸಂಜಯ್ ಗುಬ್ಬಿ ಅಂತ ಹೇಳಿ. ಆ್ಯಂಡ್ ಐ ಸ್ಪೀಕ್ ಇನ್ ಅ ಮಿಕ್ಸ್ ಆಫ್ ಇಂಗ್ಲೀಷ್ ಆ್ಯಂಡ್ ಕನ್ನಡ. ನನ್ನ ಮಾತೃಭಾಷೆ ಕನ್ನಡ, ಅದರೊಟ್ಟಿಗೆ ಆ್ಯಂಡ್ ಐ ಸಿ ಅ ಲಾಟ್ ಆಫ್ it looks like there is a trend in how people have got into wildlife. You know, Pamela attributed it to her mother, and I also need to attribute it partly to my mother, because she came from Saligrama, which is Mirle Saligrama in KR Nagar Taluk. And my grandfather was very adamant that all we grandchildren, my mother had 9 siblings, all of us during Dasra and summer holidays, which would be 3 months earlier, had to spend our time in Saligrama. So Saligrama had a very large lake. Even today it has a large lake and a beautiful village. So I used to walk along the tank and observe a lot of birds, and I didn't know any of those birds. I think one of the things which brought wildlife into me is perhaps Saligrama. So which is very close, and it's also, I'm so happy. Nange Mysuru Literature Festival karadaga, I was extremely happy because it's very close to my heart, and my mother comes from this place. I have spent a lot of time in this district, and I work a lot in this district. So it's an honor to be here, actually. It's really an honor. And the second part is a movement called Scouting. You know, there was a person called Lord Baden-Powell who started Scouting movement way back in the late 1900s. And this movement called Scouting provides opportunity for kids to go out. You know, they push you out. They ask you to go on nature trials. They ask you to do stargazing. They'll say you have to do camping, etc., etc. And that brought me to nature much closer, you know, to spend time in nature. So remember, you know, sending children to nature or sending children out of the house has a lot of advantages. But it also had a disadvantage, Mewa. So I became the rogue child at home, you know, wouldn't listen to my parents. Appa amman maat keldilo maga nanu kone maga. So what happened is, you know, like a lot of other middle class, lower middle class families, we had 2 options. A lot of you know this story very well, either engineering or medicine. So like Krishnamachari Shrikant, I did electrical engineering. And even if today, if any of you ask me a technical question, I'll have to start. So I'll quit my engineering profession a long time ago. If people ask me these technical questions on electrical engineering, I'll start becoming. Yeah, very good thing actually. But so that's how I started my interest in nature. Then I went on to do bird watching, and I used to lie a lot at home. ಮನೇಲಿ ಭಾಳ ಸುಳ್ಳು ಹೇಳ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದೆ. ನಾನು ಓದಕ್ಕೆ ಹೋಗ್ತೀನಿ ಅಂತ ಹಂಪಾಪುರ, KR ನಗರದ ಹತ್ರ ಹಂಪಾಪುರ ಇದೆ, ನಮ್ಮ ಚಿಕ್ಕಮ್ಮನ ಊರದು. And they used to live here. I used to say I'll go to Hampapura, drop off my bags and go to Nagarhole. ತುಮಕೂರಿನಿಂದ ಬರೋದು ನಾಗರಹೊಳೆಗೆ ಬಹಳ ಕಷ್ಟ ಆವಾಗ. ಬೆಳಗ್ಗೆ ಮಧುಗಿರಿಯಲ್ಲಿ 5:15 ಒಂದು ಬಸ್ ಬಿಡೋದು, ಉದಯರಂಗ ಅಂತ. A bus would start at Madhugiri in my home district at 5:15 in the morning, and I would reach Nagarhole by around 5:45, 6 in the evening. But the gate closes at 6 o'clock. So if I miss that time, I have to stay overnight somewhere, literally somewhere, and then go to Nagarhole the next morning. So all this went on and also had a very serious impact on my studies. But at some point of time, I decided engineering is not something I would like to continue. So in my third year, I quit engineering. I went on to work for WWF in Kokrebellur. You know, it was my first work. In 1992, I started working on painted stocks and spot-billed pelicans. ಹೆಜ್ಜರ್ಲೆ ಅಂತ ಕನ್ನಡದಲ್ಲಿ ಕರೀತಾರೆ. ಬಣ್ಣದ ಕೊಕ್ಕರೆ ಅಂತ ಇನ್ನೊಂದು painted stock. I started working, but after 1.5 years, I realized if I want to continue in wildlife conservation, this is especially true for all the younger people up here, I realized that I needed a degree. Without a degree, I couldn't do anything. And one of the things which I really made me not like engineering was mathematics. Okay, integration especially. And then I came back anyhow. I realized I came back and completed my engineering. At some point of time, I realized I have to do a master's in wildlife biology. I went and took a master's. I got a scholarship. And the first class in my master's degree was statistics. Imagine somebody who didn't like mathematics had to learn statistics. So this is how wildlife biology is all about. But by heart, I'm a conservationist. I started as a conservationist. ಅಂದರೆ ವನ್ಯಜೀವಿ ಸಂರಕ್ಷಣೆಯಲ್ಲಿ ನಾನು ಮೊದಲು ಪ್ರಾರಂಭ ಮಾಡಿದ್ದು, ಆಮೇಲೆ ವನ್ಯಜೀವಿ ವಿಜ್ಞಾನ. ಅಂದರೆ ಹೊಟ್ಟೆಯಲ್ಲಿ ನಮಗೆ ಆ ಬೆಂಕಿ ಇತ್ತು. ನಾವು ಚಿಕ್ಕೂರಿನಿಂದ ಬಂದವರು. ನಮ್ಮದು ಊರು ಗುಬ್ಬಿ, ತುಮಕೂರು ತಾಲೂಕು ಗುಬ್ಬಿ. ನಾವು ಓದಿದ್ದೆಲ್ಲ ಪುಟ್ಟ ಊರುಗಳಲ್ಲಿ. ಯಾರಿಗೂ ಅವತ್ತು ಹಳ್ಳಿಗಳು ಅಂದರೆ ಇವಾಗ ಬಹಳ ಮಾರ್ಪಾಡಾಗಿದೆ. ಟುಡೇಸ್ ರೂರಲ್ ಇಂಡಿಯಾ ಈಸ್ ಅ ಲಾಟ್ ಡಿಫ್ರೆಂಟ್ ದೆನ್ ವಾಟ್ ಇಟ್ ವಾಸ್ ಅರ್ಲಿಯರ್. So we really grew up in rural India. I learnt my ABCD English alphabets in my 8th class, to be very honest. And today I've written 4 books in English. So it all relates to what Rajdeep Sardesai told yesterday, Charu Sharma said, and Krishnamachari Shrikant was saying, you need to have fire in your belly. And people in IPL who are going to be playing are also from these smaller towns and cities. But I will also add that from smaller villages we will come up and we will do well in this country.
Thanks, Sanjay. So before we go to the book and the main subject matter, I want you people to talk a little bit more about the subject matter. Those who have read the book, I don't know how many people have seen this book or read this book, From the Heart of Nature. You must read. The beauty of this book is what fascinated me in this book is, the kind of topics she has covered, just enormous. You wouldn't think that these topics are related to each other at all. And it is not like reading the abstracts of some paper and citing it. It is as if the entire paper, entire subject has been read. Pages and pages. Suddenly she would talk about, how her mother had to take some allopathic medicine, and what about allopathic medicine? She goes on and on and on talking about what medicines do to the brain, how a neurotransmitter like serotonin gets exhausted in the brain, because these are the subjects which I know very well. What happens in the brain to the serotonin, for example, how a wildlife person is talking about serotonin in the brain, Satish, I mean, it is so fascinating. And then she's just talking about the beavers coming there and, building the dams. About the beavers, they build small dams. And then she goes on talking about eco-restoration, how beaver becomes a keystone species, how it, how so many other species gain, how a new ecosystem gets created by the building of dams by the beavers. And like this, there are so many topics covered in this. And suddenly she would go, when Anil Malhotra would discuss with her, she wouldn't agree with many of the things, when he would talk about Vietnam War, and very angry about it. And then about Bangladesh, what Pakistan did in Bangladesh. And then she would go back to how early American settlers, for example, how they simply killed millions of buffaloes, simply not for meat, but to starve the Red Indians living there, so that they die of starvation, to deprive them of their food. I mean, these are so many topics. I am just talking about 3-4. I just want you to tell people, how did you acquire this kind of knowledge that you have dealt in depth so many topics? I mean, other than wildlife. We'll come back to wildlife again. Just very briefly.
Thank you. I again have to credit my husband to a great deal, because he told me so many things and I didn't believe them. So I was in college at the time we met. I was doing graduate studies in history and politics. By the way, I love scientists. I love them because I'm not a scientist. So I learned so much from the scientists I come in contact with, and so I'm very grateful for the scientists. So my husband would tell me various things, and I wouldn't believe them. And in order to prove him wrong, I went back to college, and then I'd write research papers on the topics that he would tell me, whether it was Vietnam, whether it was Bangladesh, all of these different topics. And I found out he was right. And so lots of veils and veils and veils came off of my mind and off of my eyes as a result of my husband opening my mind and opening my interest in learning more and more and more. So again, I have to credit him to a great deal. And then I've been very fortunate. I seem to have been put in situations where I worked with a pharmaceutical company, and that took off veils about allopathic medicine and what goes on there, or becoming in contact with people like Sanjay or people like yourself, and hearing and reading about those types of things, like nature deficit disorder for children, and how children are suffering because we're not keeping them in nature and how much they benefit from being in nature for their entire lives. You and I were very, very, very fortunate.
Yeah.
Very fortunate. So it was kind of a combination of all these things. And my mother was a teacher. Now, she was a grammar school teacher, but she encouraged me to dive into nature, dive into whatever my passion was. And so, again, I have to credit her for that, too.
Excellent. Sanjay, as you have covered so many topics in not only this book, your other books also. So something about, this vastness of the subject.
No, one thing is which is very important to understand is wildlife conservation or nature conservation in general is not just about ecology. It's not just about animals. When you're working on this subject or when you're trying to fight for conservation, you'll come across a wide variety of people and wide landscapes. You'll see a lot of things. You meet nice people. You meet people like Mewa Singh, this new frog named as Mewa Singh's night frog. Do you know why? It's really matches Mewa because Mewa is a man of the nightlife, So I don't know why his student named it as Mewa Singh's night frog, but it really matches him. I hope you understand what I meant. He really likes to have his single malt or his whiskey at night times for a longer time. So it's a very apt name the students have given you and given the frog Mewa. But as I said, you come across a lot of people, you meet wonderful variety of people. I met Prince Charles once and he said, "Oh, you are the man who were attacked by the leopard. Where are your scars?" So you don't know that who knows you actually. But I also have met wonderful people and wonderful experiences, and I will try and read out a small part of my book, which is about something which is also related to Mysuru. I'll read out this small section. I hope you like it. It's about a small hotel in Halgur near on the way from Kanakpura to Kollegal. And I loved the dosas there. So you don't write only about wildlife, but you write a lot around wildlife. Just at the entrance stood a large saucepan-like open steel pan filled 3/4 with water on a tabletop. Small dollops of white butter that looked like small compact mass of cotton flowed in the water. Suresh's father, the owner, a spry white-haired man always draped in a lungi, mostly a patterned light blue, stood at the till right at the entrance of the hotel and shouted orders at the top of his voice into the kitchen, where Suresh made dosas on a hot, thick cast iron plate. Suresh said it took the better part of an hour to heat up the dosa plate before the dosa batter could be put to use. I'm sure all of you understand and you really can visualize this. Slim in build, he mostly wore a white sleeveless vest that helped him keep cool in the hot, sweaty kitchen. A golden bracelet loosely dangled off his right hand and showed that their handiwork with the dosas had paid off reasonably well. Those golden brown dosas, slightly smaller than the size of a palm, made from the most delectable of meals, hot and crispy, they were served neatly folded in half with steamed spicy potato, onion, green chilies, and spices filled in the middle. As the waiter served each customer a plate with 4 small masala dosas, he would utter one word, "Benne," the Kannada word for butter. I do not remember a single time when I had answered no to that question. In a flash of a second, he would fish out a dollop of butter from the steel pan and skillfully throw it onto the topmost dosa on my plate like a professional frisbee player. Though the dosas were already loaded with enough oil to light up 100 temple oil lamps for 2 days, the extra butter added to the taste. One had to let go of calorie consciousness at Veerbhadrashwara Bhavana. So this is a place you really had to go if you went to Halgur. I'll end up with the last paragraph. A steel cup filled with slightly reddish chutney made out of red chilies, coconut, gram and other ingredients were left on every table so that customers could liberally use the thick coconut chutney with the dosas they ate. Bright red plastic jugs, slightly dirtied with constant handling, filled with water would come to your rescue if the chutney was too hot to handle. Finally, a small square piece of old newspaper would be handed in a place of a tissue as it is in most small eateries across Karnataka. So you see wildlife from a different perspective. You get to meet a lot of people. I've met people like, who was always or who is still thought to will become the potential prime minister of the country. You know whom I am talking about. And that day I decided I can't vote to this party if this person continues to be on the hem of the affairs. No political thinking there. But you get to meet such people. You also get to meet wonderful people like Pamela and Mewa and many of these people here. So it's a lot about society. And if we have to make society like wildlife, we have to communicate in a manner they understand. So I just don't work with scientists. It's a misnomer for me. I'm not truly a scientist. I like science. I do science. I have a PhD on leopards, but I work with political leaders. I'll tell you a secret. It will be made open today. I walked into forest ministers with their girlfriends in their rooms. I have met cricket stars. I've worked with the royal family. I've worked with the lowest staff and the forest personnel. But it gives you this enormous perspective. ಸಮಾಜದ ಎಲ್ಲರ ಜೊತೆ ಕೆಲಸ ಮಾಡೋದಂದ್ರೆ ಮಾತ್ರ ವನ್ಯಜೀವಿ ಸಂರಕ್ಷಣೆ ಮಾಡಲಿಕ್ಕಾಗೋದು. ಅದೇ ನಮಗೆ ಆ ಅವಕಾಶ ಮಾಡಿಕೊಟ್ಟಿದ್ದು. If I was just Sanjay Gubbi, I could not have met Rahul Gandhi. I could not have met Prince Charles. I could not have met Mr. Yaduvir. I could not have met Anil Kumble and worked with them very closely. And I owe everything today. I am what I am today, and whom I have met and what I have got, all to this, actually, these animals. If they were not there, I would be nowhere. I would be no one, actually.
Thanks, Sanjay. Okay, now coming back to the books and the main subject matter in these books. See, already it has been introduced what Pamela and Anil did, establishment of not the first, but still the only private wildlife sanctuary in India. What they have established in Coorg, they started in Uttarakhand, but they were allowed only 12 acres of land because of the government rules. Then they came out such places in Telangana, in Hyderabad, in Andhra Pradesh, in Tamil Nadu, everywhere, and finally settled in Coorg. This concept of a private sanctuary is not new, but it's new in India. In Africa, for example, in South Africa alone, there are more than 500 private sanctuaries. They have established, for us it's huge, 300 acres of private land, which is totally, she would talk more about, what kind of animals, including tiger coming in there now. So, but there, this Mala Mala, I have seen it myself because I was in Kruger for quite some time. Mala Mala private sanctuary in South Africa is 33,000 acres. It's a private sanctuary, and it has a 19 kilometers unfenced connectivity with Kruger National Park. So you can imagine all animals of Kruger National Park keep coming there. They don't have to do anything. I have stayed in one private sanctuary in Tanzania, and that used to go there for hours together. They have network of roads. You can drive in daytime, nighttime, and all. So these sanctuaries have been like this in Africa, in Kenya, in Tanzania, and South Africa a lot. But this is first time in India that a private sanctuary has been established where you have all kind of wildlife. This is really a great effort. So Pamela, I would like you to tell a little bit more about SAI and how you started there and what is the shape of this today?
My husband, as I mentioned, first found the land, and because it was abandoned plantation land, the Land Sealing Acts did not apply when the land was deemed plantation. And the lands that have become part of SAI Sanctuary were virtually all abandoned by the people who had owned them previously because of the rainfall and because of proximity to the Brahmagiri Wildlife Sanctuary to a certain degree from a wildlife point of view. So for us, they were the ideal pieces to pick up so that we could increase the border or buffer zone for the Brahmagiri Wildlife Sanctuary by about 1 square kilometer. I mean, that's nothing compared to Africa, but for us, it has made a major difference with the wildlife as well. And over the years, we have seen more and more different species and more of the same species coming to the sanctuary. So we have many species that are Schedule 1 and very endangered, many iconic species. In fact, pretty much all the iconic species of India, from the Bengal tiger to the Indian leopard to the Asian elephant, and others as well, such as otters and the small clawed otter, also Schedule 1, very endangered. And for the first time in over a century, through camera trap, we've documented the return of the Eurasian river otter in our sanctuary. So this is very important. We know of our larger predators, but most people don't realize that otters are so critical because they're like the wolves of the water, and they're indicator species. They let you know how dirty or clean your water is, because if your water is too dirty, they are not going to find the crabs and the fish and the other food that they need to eat to survive. So now we're very happy that they actually are coming to our sanctuary and raising their young every year, et cetera, et cetera. Also a lot of bird species, and as I shared with both of them, especially Mewa, who is a primatologist, the Nilgiri langur has come as well to us, and we have a cross-species family of a Nilgiri langur dad, who's really black, and I call him Ebony, and a gray langur mom, who I call Ivory, and their little one, I don't know if it's a male or a female, so it's just Chotu or Choti at this point. So, but it's been challenging in many, many ways. We have had to work very hard against misconceptions about wildlife and about our purpose there with some of the local people. It's difficult that way, but it's what Sanjay said. You have to work with the society. You have to work with the people, really, if your conservation is going to be effective. And our hope has always been that our sanctuary will be used as a model to be replicated across India, and eventually biological corridors linking countries around the world. That's my prayer, that's my hope, that's my dream.
Can I ask you a slightly immodest question? There's a crossbreed because there's a crossbreed family from America and India also in the
I call them the odd couple because we're the odd couple.
Okay. Yeah, Pamela is very right, the work they have done, as a couple is unbelievable. They established the first model of how private individuals can set up and bring back biodiversity. So what is very important is that they measured their success. They have animals coming back. ಪ್ರಾಣಿಗಳು ಸುಮ್ಮನೆ ಬರೋದಿಲ್ಲ. ಅದು ನಾವು ಹೋಗಿ ಬಿಸ್ಕೆಟ್ ಹಾಕಿದ ತಕ್ಷಣ ನಾಯಿ ಬರುತ್ತೆ, ಆದರೆ ನಮಗೆ ಆನೆ ಬರೋದಿಲ್ಲ, ಹುಲಿ ಬರೋದಿಲ್ಲ, ಚಿರತೆ ಬರೋದಿಲ್ಲ, ನೀರ್ನಾಯಿ ಬರೋದಿಲ್ಲ. Otters won't come if you throw a biscuit at them. So that's not wildlife, that is animal rights. One thing we need to really clearly understand is the difference between animal rights and the difference between wildlife conservation. A lot of people, especially these days, wildlife conservation or wildlife has become a popular thing. People go on wildlife safaris and they think they're doing something for wildlife. Actually, no. You're actually disturbed. We are putting in more pressure on wildlife because of that. Just because you're going to a museum doesn't mean that you're an artist. Because you walk through a library, it doesn't mean that you're an author, actually. So wildlife is also a very important subject. It's a science, first of all, but you need passion to it. You need determination. You need long-term work. Only when you do long-term work, and one thing which is very important is to understand the society, to understand how the system works. There are various people and various stakeholders in this field, and we can't expect somebody else to do the work. Like Mewa said, we publish a lot of scientific papers, but believe me, these scientific papers are maximum read by 4 people, the editor of the journal and myself and perhaps a couple of reviewers, and by mistake, a couple of other scientists, that's it. But if you write popular articles, popular books, they reach a wide sector of people. Many times, ಕೆಲವು ಸಲ ನನಗೆ ಫೋನ್ ಮಾಡ್ತಾರೆ, ಇತ್ತೀಚೆಗೆ ಯಾರೋ ದೊಡ್ಡಮನೆ ಘಾಟ್ ಅಂತ ಶಿವಮೊಗ್ಗ ಮತ್ತು ಉತ್ತರ ಕನ್ನಡದ ರೇಖೆಯಲ್ಲಿ ಗಡಿಯಲ್ಲಿರುವಂಥ ಒಂದು ಚಿಕ್ಕ ಹಳ್ಳಿಯಿಂದ one young boy called me. He said, sir, ನಾನು ಇಲ್ಲಿ ನಮ್ಮ ದೇವಸ್ಥಾನದಲ್ಲಿ ನಾನು ಪೂಜೆ ಮಾಡ್ತೀನಿ ಸರ್, ಆದರೆ ನಿಮ್ಮ ಶಾಲೆಗೆ ಬಂದ ಚಿರತೆ ಮತ್ತು ಈ ಥರದ ಕಥೆಗಳು ಓದಿದೆ ಸರ್, ಭಾಳ ಸಂತೋಷ ಆಯಿತು, ನನಗೂ ಈಗ ಏನಾದರೂ ವನ್ಯಜೀವಿಗಳ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ಮಾಡಬೇಕು ಅಂತ ಅನ್ನಿಸ್ತಾ ಇದೆ ಅಂತ. Imagine, some really remote village in the Western Ghats, a boy calls me and says, I want to do something for wildlife conservation because I read ಶಾಲೆಗೆ ಬಂದ ಚಿರತೆ ಮತ್ತು ಈ ಥರ ಕಥೆಗಳು. That's the power of popular writing. That's the power of books. That's the power when you write on a good article in a newspaper. So every morning, all our political leaders read newspapers. Please remember this. They read Kannada newspapers. There's a stack of Kannada newspapers on their tables. They may not read Gitanjali, and they may not read Sita Bhaskar. They may not read Rajdeep. They may read Rajdeep Sardesai because he's in the media. But if you write in Kannada media, you write a good piece in Kannada media. I wrote a piece about Mekedatu, and I should not tell, somebody from the Congress party called me, very senior person. He said, Mr. Gubbi, I didn't even know that this was such a serious issue. I'm going for the protest only for the political reason, but I'm with you people. Can you imagine, one of the senior most leaders in Congress calls me reading a news article in Vijay Karnataka and tells, I'm not for Mekedatu now. That's the power of popular writing. I go to many ministers' offices, the PA reads my name and says, oh, Sanjay Gubbi ಅಂದ್ರೆ ಅದೇ ನೀವು ಅದೇನೋ ಪರಿಸರದ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ಬರೀತಿರಲ್ಲ ನೀವೇನಾ? ಹೌದು, ಆಯಿತು ಸರ್, ಏನಾಗಬೇಕು ಕೆಲಸ ಹೇಳಿ, ನಾನು ಮಿನಿಸ್ಟರ್ನ ನಿಮಗೆ ಭೇಟಿ ಮಾಡಿಸ್ತೀನಿ. I'll make the minister, meet you up. That's the power of popular writing. That's why we need to encourage our children to read. I was very happy when Pradesha, right? Your name is Pradesha? Parisha, sorry. Parisha is there, reading a book. That's what we need to cultivate and get it into our children now, into our grandchildren, into our society. That's popular. That's really sticks into their mind, and that's the power of books. That's the power of popular writing.
Other thing I want you people to talk about is this little bit of the literary, aspects of these books. See, something happens in a book. You read books and you may remember only one or two lines which are so critical, but those one or two lines actually define the whole book. See, say for example, Gabriel Garcia Marquez, Chandra. You read 100 Years of Solitude, and the last lines, the first of the line will be tied to the tree, and the last of the line will be eaten by the ants. Then he realized the race is condemned to 100 years of solitude, have no second chance. Or his love in the times of cholera. When one last line, for Meena Daza, because 50 years they never opened the letters. For Meena Daza, I have waited for half a century to tell you that I love you. These are some small things, when one thing which I have seen about, when you write something about Africa, for example, there are popular writers like Wilbur Smith. Now you read Wilbur Smith, you'll be so much about tribes and so much about lions there and tigers are not, elephants and so on. On the other hand, you read Chinua Achebe, one of the greatest writers. Not a mention of wilderness of Africa ever. No, I feel so many times disappointed reading. Chinua Achebe is a great storyteller. He is one of the greatest writers ever. But suddenly you realize that there is no Africa in this, because you have some concept of Africa in your mind all the time. So this literary component, I remember, the wit kind of thing which Sanjay has put. There was a leopard which came to city in Bangalore. Most of you would have seen it it was live on the TV also. That it had to be rescued. You remember that an animal, Sanjay and me would walk next to the tiger or leopard anytime, or elephants in the forest. We are not scared of tigers or elephants or leopards. Leopard may be sitting here or we will just walk by. But if a leopard comes to the city, when the management of crowd is more important, thousands of people gathered there, the animal is cornered. The animal can be very, very dangerous. So the animal had to be rescued, and Sanjay was caught there, and Sanjay went, and Sanjay was attacked by the tiger, and there is a photo of his in this book also, and he was bitten all over, a big bite on his buttock, and then all over, gashes all over. And in his book he writes very beautiful line. Later on, one of his friends tells, Sanjay, you were lucky that day. You were wearing a full sleeve shirt. A tiger with 2-inch nails. And how much is that? This is a thick shirt. Actually, he was wearing a very thin shirt that day. A person says, you are very lucky you are wearing a full sleeve shirt. So you reading such a serious thing. Suddenly you read, you start laughing. And the whole thing, it becomes reading a serious stuff. Everything becomes so nice. So I want you to both you talk about a little bit of literary component of your books.
See, if you don't You can't be all the time serious, I'm not serious sometimes in my life also. Um, because Mewa brought up this issue of the leopard in the school. It's a chapter called the Vibgaya leopard, okay, in the book, if you ever like to read it. And I've done this many times, people call you, so there's a leopard here, why don't you come and help us rescue the leopard? Rescue the leopard is, in quotes again. And this was one of those Sunday afternoons. I'm mostly go to Bangalore on Sundays as weekend trips. People go out of Bangalore on weekends. I try to go to Bangalore because my family stays there. So that Sunday afternoon, I was sitting and watching very rarely I was watching a movie on YouTube, Sri Murali's Kannada movie. And then at 3 o'clock, I get a telephone call from the forest officer saying, "So there's a leopard in the school. Okay, can you please come and help us, capture it?" So I said, okay, I need to go out now. There's a bag behind the screen. That was the bag I took with me as well. It has a torn mark even today. It's one of those lucky bags which is encountered with a wild leopard. So you can touch it if you like. And feel that you have also touched a wild leopard. So, and another two objects I always carry is a pair of binoculars and a torch. So that it gets dark, you need it. So I walked out of the house. My wife was standing at the door. I said, there's a leopard in the school, so I'll see you later. I never knew that when I said her, I'll see you later, it meant a couple of weeks. It really was a few weeks before I saw her again, or I came back home. So we went to the school, we did a lot of things, understood the anatomy of the building, why the leopard was there, where was it, and how do we capture it, how do you tranquilize it, all these calculations went on in my mind. And one last thing I always do is to prepare my escape. I have to escape, run away if the leopard comes out of the building or something. And for some reason, there were a lot of media personnel because it was in Bangalore city, outskirts of Bangalore city. So I couldn't plan my escape route, basically. And at that time, somebody disturbed the animal in the bathroom and the leopard came out. And I was very conscious. There were children playing cricket outside the school grounds. So I didn't want the leopard to go to the grounds because it could maul a lot of children. So I wanted to keep the leopard inside. And there were 3 veterinarians with dart guns with me. And when the leopard came out, and I saw, and all the 3 veterinarians and the dart guns were vanished. They were not there. All of them were gone. So I'm left with it now, and I started sprinting and trying to escape. And then came a security man. I'm sure that day he ran faster than Usain Bolt. I promise you. I promise you it happened that day. He zoomed right next to me. And then fortunately or unfortunately, I was trying to climb a gate and I couldn't climb out because of reason, it's in the book. And then for a fraction of a second, my family, just passed at that fraction of a second. What would happen, etc., etc. Then next thing which came to my mind, I was super cool, super calm. Sorry, I'm not super cool. So next thing which came to my mind is I wanted to know where the leopard was. And I turn and I see these 2 beautiful green eyes right next to me, just below my butt. And the first thing it did was it jumped up and caught my butt. And it bit me twice on the butt. And Girish Rao, who is a Kannada author and a journalist, somewhere has made a very nice comment. He calls my book Shalege Banda Chirute and Itara Kathegulu. You didn't understand that. You better not. So, truly it is Shalage Banda Chirte and Itara Kathegulu. And Itara Kathegulu. So, there are 8 bite marks in the and a total of 55 stitches on my body. And out of it, half of it is in the and only then I realized how important an and was in everybody's life, not just in my life, in everybody's life. And you can write this very seriously. And then somebody came and said, sir, I heard that leopard, a journalist actually, I remember it now very well, it's also in the part of the book. A journalist came and said, sir, we heard from the forest officials that this leopard didn't have the canines. There were broken canines. That's why you were not seriously injured. I was like, imagine, if the leopard had bitten me here, I could open my shirt like Hanmanta and showed him. What do I show now? So it's a leopard, ಶಾಲೆಗೆ ಬಂದ ಚಿರತೆ and ಈ ಥರ ಕಥೆಗಳು. So what do I show? So it's very difficult, the journalist didn't understand that. And it's not also some place where I can open up and show my heroics. So my heroics, unfortunately, is hidden behind. Literally, yes. Thank you, Pamela. So until we get the message out in the way people like it and people can laugh about it, I laugh about it every day. People remind about it to me every day. For a long time, when I took a Ola, I booked a Ola cab, and then I would get in a Ola, and then the driver would look at me very seriously. I was like, oh, he doesn't like me. Then after 10 minutes, he would say, sir, on maat kela bejar ಮಾಡ್ಕೋಬೇಡಿ. ಒಂದು ಮಾತು ಆಯಿತು ಕೇಳಪ್ಪ, ಬೇಜಾರೇನು ಮಾಡ್ಕೊಳ್ಳೋದಿದೆ ಅದರೊಳಗಡೆ. ಸರ್, ಅದು ಸ್ಕೂಲು ಶಾಲೆಗೆ ಚಿರತೆ ನೀವೇನಾ ಸರ್ ಅಂತ. ಆ ಸ್ಕೂಲು ವಿಬ್ಗಯರು ಚಿರತೆ ನೀವೇನಾ ಅಂತ. ಹೌದಪ್ಪ, ನಾನು ಅವಾಗಲೇ ಅನ್ಕೊಂಡೆ ಬಿಡಿ ಸರ್, ನೀವೇ ಇರಬೇಕದು. He was literally like, what a useless guy he is. Yeah, Mewa.
Okay, we have about another 10 minutes or so, 10 to 12 minutes. So briefly about some 2-3 minutes about the literary component of the book, and then we'll have some questions from people.
Okay. While my book has a lot of different facts and all that I've taken from scientists, etc. I've written a lot of examples of my interaction with the wildlife there. And as they both pointed out very accurately, the wildlife in the forests are not the danger. It's only when they're out in villages or mainly cities that you have your problems because they feel cornered. So in our sanctuary, there are no jeep safaris. It's all on foot. So you need to, number one, respect the space of wildlife. Number two, feel love in your heart. Feel love and peace in your heart. No one in all the years we've been at the sanctuary has been attacked by any wild animals. We're very strict with taking people out, but that means Anil and myself and our crew as well. And some of the most extraordinary experiences I have been with elephants. Wonderful, extraordinary experiences with the elephants and the amount that they have trusted me. I have taken so many videos, including one on a bridge that connects both sides of our sanctuary, where I am on the bridge, Cuttail, which is the name of one of the oldest elephants there. She recognizes me, sniffs the air, her older daughter is behind her, and knows it's me and goes right under me. And I'm able to film the entire encounter. No threat. She could have gone the other direction. Nothing at all. And it's the same with wildlife in general. So if I would want to leave a thought with everyone, it would be, number one, remember where we all come from. We all come from Mother Nature. That is our origin, and we need to reconnect with her. Number two, we need to respect Mother Nature and all the other species as our brothers and sisters, which is part of the Vedic tradition, but with also very much part of the Native American tradition. Recognizing not just the wild species, but the rivers, the mountains, every aspect of nature, respecting it. Because without her, we can't exist. And the third, fall back in love with Mother Nature. Feel that love in your heart. Feel the passion to protect her, to help her in your heart. And if you have that kind of an attitude, I guarantee you, your experiences in nature will be many and unforgettably wonderful. So I don't want to take any more time.
Yeah, what Pamela says is very, very true. I don't know how many of you know that Chamundi Hills had tigers in it. I write in this book, 1948, October, Neelkant Rao, who used to be the wildlife game preservation officer at Mysuru Palace, writes about a tiger being seen near Dalvaikere and Rayankatte. And 2 days later, the Princess of Sanada from Gujarat will be visiting Mysore, and she also sees it. So finally, it gets killed. The tiger gets killed. So Chamundi Hills had tigers in it. Even today, it has about 4 or 5 leopards. When I first started working in Chamundi Hills in 2013, we started camera trapping. There used to be about 9 to 10 leopards. Today, there are only about 4 or 5 because a lot of leopards have been captured and translocated or taken to other places. Road accident is another major cause. So I have been, even in the Shalage Bandha Chirite Kannada book, I've written that the citizens of Mysore, I'm hoping that they will put their efforts to save the wild denizens of Chamundi Hills. It's very important. I don't know if you know that there's a species called Bengal fox, Kannadadalli Kappulunari anta karitare. Kucha tara bala irutte. It's like a very fascinating animal. It's found only in the drier parts of the state and other parts of the country, but you have it in Chamundi Hills. It's a very, very unique animal. Once I got on a camera trap a leucistic, a white form of a small Indian civet, nowhere else seen but in Chamundi Hills. So Chamundi Hills is really rich in wildlife, maybe smaller animals. Many times I have got on camera trap leopards right next to the highway, the Ooty highway, right very close to the petrol bunk, on the left-hand side if you're driving. Just before the BGS ashrama there, I've seen leopards there. I've got them on camera traps. So it's a very unique place where a good population of felines, large felids, are living right next to our city, and we need to protect it. We need to fight to conserve it. That's our heritage as well. ನೀವು ಮೈಸೂರು ಅರಮನೆ ನಮಗೆ ಹೇಗೆ ಒಂದು ಹೆರಿಟೇಜು, ಆಸ್ ಮೈಸೂರು ಇಸ್ ಅವರ್ ಹೆರಿಟೇಜ್, ವಿ ಆಲ್ಸೋ ನೀಡ್ ಟು ಪ್ರೊಟೆಕ್ಟ್ ದಿಸ್ ಹೆರಿಟೇಜ್. ಇಟ್ಸ್ ಆಲ್ಸೋ ವೆರಿ, ವೆರಿ ಇಂಪಾರ್ಟೆಂಟ್. And one more thing I would like to tell you is another chapter which I really like in this book, and I also liked this particular animal, is called Benki. My son named it as Benki. It was a leopard. It was really a fire, actually. It was fire. I'm sure it had fire in its eye, not just in the belly. So I had radio collared it and monitored it for a long time. I walked behind it for 5 minutes. I'll send, let Benki loose on you. Okay, 5 minutes, is it? Or 10? Okay, so the collar which I had put on Benki is out there on the table. If you want to go and touch, because it was on Benki's neck for a very long time, I really feel like when I touch it, I'm touching Benki actually. And that's the connect we need to have with nature, with wildlife. And that's when the passion comes. That's when we really fight to save wildlife. And I'm sure Mysoreans will fight for Chamundi Hills, will have this wonderful place for a long, long time to come.
Okay, before I ask the question from public, I just want to compliment and what Pamela and Anil has done, which is becoming a new concept now. Actually, they have set the example for the country. I am working in several wildlife parks, including Nicobar Islands. We have started this concept called private. See, there is a place called Valpare town in near Pollachi. All around there are about 3,000 square kilometers of forests. It's about 200 square kilometers of tea plantations. But there are a lot of private forest fragments. And there are elephants there are gores, there are sambars, there are lion-tailed monkeys, there are Nilgiri langurs. Now, Tamil Nadu Forest Department has actually officially asked me a 10-year species recovery plan, which I am writing. There are lots of some student, Anita, work, how these fragments can be connected. They are all private. So with very narrow corridors, they can be connected and they can actually be commercially viable for people because they can establish their private wildlife sanctuaries. They can earn a lot of money. Some people have started private resorts there. In their own backyard, there would be elephants, there would be tigers, there are leopards all the time. So this concept will be taken forward probably in the rest of the country. Lot more things would happen, which even the scientists are now propagating the same as sort of private sanctuaries to private linking of corridors, where the wildlife would come into their backyards. Okay, I think we have about 3 or 4 minutes left, and I'm sure there could be a lot of questions, but as the time permits, yeah. Yeah.
I have a question myself. First of all, Sanjay Gubbi, congrats on your leopard autograph posterior. My question is about the language that we address when we are talking to the wildlife. I remember seeing a poster on social media. It says the deer crossing the road, but it should be the otherwise, the road crossing the forest, because we've made inroads into the forest. And another one where the poster was, they say tiger claw, it's supposed to be lucky, but a tiger is still unlucky having 10. So that's one thing. And instead of addressing as man-eater, I think we should change the narrative to animal hunter or wildlife hunter, because man is the threat to wildlife. It's not the other way around. So what do you think about the change of narrative and language?
What's your good name, please?
Nishita.
Nishita, one thing, yes, I agree with you that narratives have to change, terminologies have to change, but what really needs to change is up here. Until and unless we have changed that, we say that Kaveri comes, our water comes from Bagmandla, and we need to save it. And my water comes from Hemavati, I need to save it. Or my water comes from Krishna or Tunga or Bhadra or Netavati, we need to save it. None of this matters much. The narratives are right, I agree with you. But until and unless we really go out and fight for this, this is a cause which you will not have mass gatherings. You will not have public support, large public support. It will have very few, but they are dedicated people who will fight for it. And that's very important. And even if we can't, as concerned citizens, we need to support those causes. That's very important. But everything has to first change here. This morning I was on a walk near Vijayanagara. There was a man who came out with a big box, cardboard box of biscuits. He opened it, threw the wrapper out, threw the biscuit, opened the biscuit packet and fed it to the dogs. It's completely wrong. First, he is filthying our city by throwing rash. Second thing is encouraging feral dogs, which are actually not good for the society. But in their mind, in his mindset, he is doing a very wonderful thing because he's feeding the dogs. So we don't have logical thinking, forget about scientific thinking. We need to have rational, logical thinking, and once that comes, a lot of things will change.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Sudhir. It's a part opinion, part question. When we talk about literature, we are targeting, I would say, a semi-elite or an elite group who has got the liberty and the luxury of reading something. However, when we talk about conservation, conservation is spread democratically everywhere. So, to reach out to the community that is really to be taken along in a conservation initiative and using literature as a tool. It was science dominated all these days. As you rightly pointed out, beyond 4 people, nobody would read. Conservation as a community pride, as a direction of literature, is something which I think can be a food for thought, where we have been traditionally a very conservation-oriented community for generations. Past barring 300-400 years of industrialization, money making, etc. Every community which is native to the land has always associated itself one or the other way with the soil, the tree, the river, etc. So bringing back that pride of conservation through literature is something where we will be able to connect to the roots. So I would like your thoughts on that.
I agree with you that you have to engage the community. In our own situation, we outsource various things with whatever ecotourism we do. We outsource it to members of the local community. But I also agree with you very much that literature aimed at the community and really aimed at children is very important. Native American culture is not a written culture. It is a storytelling culture. And this is where it's so important for stories to be told, both from a literary printed point of view, as well as workshops and people coming into classrooms. I've given presentations to so many school children, college children, from the lowest age all the way up. So I agree with you. In order to bring back that pride, it's important to work with the community, There are ways of doing that also. One I have touched on quite a bit in my book is payment for ecosystem services, which involves community cooperation and involvement, but also the literature aspect of it. And the verbal storytelling. This is so important, and that's what books basically do. They tell a story. They tell a story. And the more stories we can spread about the joys of conservation and the pride, as you say, when you take something brown and it suddenly becomes green because you've revived a water area, or you give a child a seed and they plant it and they watch it grow, that really helps to instill it in the heart. So I agree with you 100%.
Okay, one last question there. Somebody had raised the hand. Behind. Somebody else asked before, yeah. That lady, yeah. If time permits, fine.
Good afternoon. My name is Rashmi. This is a question to both of you. Currently, with the increase, to both of you, yes, Dr. Gubbi and Ms. Pamela. This is with the increasing urbanization. Today, the only nature most of us see are 4 potted plants and a sad tree on the roadside, which is covered with the paving bricks, so that it doesn't get water, and within a few years it dies. How do we have a more experiential learning for our children and even the adults? Since you work with governments and you have a conservation, you have set up your own SIA, how do we work with children and with adults more to give them a more experiential learning on nature?
Sorry, what was your name again?
Rashmi.
Rashmi, very nice. 2 things. First thing is we just need to keep our eyes, ears open, and this one shut. There's a lot of wildlife around us. It's not that we have to go to Nagarhole and Bandipur to see wildlife. There's untamed number of wildlife right inside our city, which we just need to, if you go to Kukrali Kere, you'll see spot-billed pelicans, you'll see painted stock nesting, spot-billed pelicans, jackals in Mysuru city. So we just need to keep our eyes open, and we need to have that inquisitiveness. ಪರಿಸರ ಅಥವಾ ವನ್ಯಜೀವಿಗಳ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ತಿಳ್ಕೊಳ್ಬೇಕು ಅಂದರೆ ಅದು ನಾವು ಒಂಥರ ಪತ್ತೆದಾರಿ ಥರ ಆಗಬೇಕು. ಪತ್ತೆದಾರಿ ಶ್ಯಾಮ ಅಂತ ಪತ್ತೆದಾರಿ ಪುಸ್ತಕ ಓದಿದ್ದೀರಾ? ಸೊ ಯು ಹ್ಯಾವ್ ಟು ಬಿ ಅ ಡಿಟೆಕ್ಟಿವ್. ಯು ನೀಡ್ ಟು ಹ್ಯಾವ್ ಅ ಲಾಟ್ ಆಫ್ ಇನ್ಕ್ವಿಸಿಟಿವ್ನೆಸ್ ಅಬೌಟ್ ನೇಚರ್. ಯು ನೀಡ್ ಟು ಟ್ರೈ ಎವ್ರಿಥಿಂಗ್. ಅಲ್ಲೊಂದು ಕಸ ಅಂದರೆ ಹಿಕ್ಕೆ ಬಿದ್ದಿದ್ರು ಆರ್ ಫೀಕಲ್ ಮ್ಯಾಟರ್ ಇಸ್ ಜಸ್ಟ್ ಅ ವೆರಿ ಡೀಸೆಂಟ್ ಟರ್ಮಿನಾಲಜೀಸ್ ಫಾರ್ ಆನಿಮಲ್ ಶಿಟ್. So even if it is there, you go and smell it, you see what it has eaten, and that kind of inquisitiveness is what will actually bring you closer to nature.
I think one last one is here, quickly, because we are run short of time.
No, that's okay. I think. No, the further questions are going to be taken at the author's lounge. I'm sorry, at the author's lounge. Okay. Wildlife and many dosas, and I'm sure the evening was very scintillating and inspirational. On behalf of the Mysore Literature Festival and Forum, I would like to thank Mrs. Pamela Malhotra, Dr. Sanjay Gubbi, Dr. Mewa Singh for their experiences and conviction to the cause. I would also like to thank our audience for their rapt attention and participation. The take home for me is a reminder of this beautiful quote: "There is nobility in compassion, beauty in empathy, and a grace in forgiveness. Let us all join our hands together to save nature so that nature can save us." Thank you.